Hello, my friends. Mandy here with a quick invitation for you to join the Patreon for our show. We've recently switched up some of the benefits, including a new monthly workbook to go along with all the incredible content you're getting on the show. It's a quote yourself through grief kind of a vibe, and for only $10 a month, it is a wholly worthy and affordable way to invest in your own healing process without the commitment of a full coaching relationship. Learn more at patreon.com/Mandy Capehart, and of course, the link is in the show notes. Thank you as always for being here. Now let's get into the good stuff. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 105, titled Grieving While Believing with Kate Boyd. Welcome back, everybody. My guest this week is a beautiful soul, and I'm so excited for you to get to know her because she's wonderful. Kate Boyd is the author of An Untidy Faith, released by Herald Press this last April. She's also the creator of the upcoming Threaded Bible Studies and host of the Untidy Faith podcast. She helps weary and wounded Christians rebuild their relationship with Scripture and community and their love of God and their neighbors with their whole selves, which is a lot to do. But she does it because she has experienced grief and confusion of that messy middle ground of faith changes and what happens when we ask some unanswerable questions. So I'm really excited for you if you have dealt with any of your faith being challenged or trying to navigate a practice of faith while grieving, or vice versa. This is a great episode for you. So let's go. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Restorative Grief. I'm Mandy. And this week, my guest is such a beautiful soul. I can't wait for you to get to know Kate. She's the author of An Untidy Faith, recently released this last April. She's the creator of the Threaded Bible Studies and host of the Untidy Faith podcast. I love Kate because she is such an invitational human, and you're about to find that out for yourself. So welcome to the show, Kate.
Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I love that you have always been such a soft place to land. We met online on Twitter, I think, and I just appreciated that invitational nature and the way that you have created space for people. So why don't you give us a little glimpse into what your book, An Untidy Faith, and your work is all about?
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I think when the pandemic hit, everyone, I think a lot of people went through a faith crisis, um, or it accelerated a faith crisis that was already happening, or it reopened that sort of space. Like for me, I had already sort of like dealt with a lot of the theological aspects, but the social things were really becoming very apparent in, the churches and the communities that I was in. And so I think it sort of forced us all to find another way to connect or start sorting through things. Um and I think it typically goes under the heading of quote unquote deconstruction. And I just sort of realized that a lot of what people were dealing with were stuff that I had walked through many years ago because I had sort of gone through that sort of like theological reckoning in a lot of ways, because of some experiences I had overseas. And so I was like, there are a lot of people who, are going through some really, really heavy things and need to separate from their faith completely.
Mm.
Um, and then there are people who are obviously gonna, like, dig their heels in and stay, but there's not someone talking to these people who are in the middle like I was, trying to, like, hold on to our faith because we still believe that there's something good in Jesus, maybe something good in the church, even if it needs, some kind of reformation, at least the traditions of our origin, and then but also, like, reckoning with untangling, disentangling, like I like to say, these different parts of our culture from, Jesus. And so that's sort of where I stepped in and was like, "Hey, I've walked some of this before. I'm going through some of this with you guys at the same time, and here's how I'm working through it. in order to sort of pull out the pieces that are good and true and beautiful and that we want to cling to while sort of dealing with that like messy other part.
Mm. I mean, that was obviously one of the reasons that drew me into you as well. I was similar and wrestling with so many things in my own faith practice and my beliefs for years. I kind of started out asking big questions and not accepting no answers. So when, like you said, everyone started recently in the recent modern history challenging notions and challenging social expectations and impact of the church, Western church on society and especially during the pandemic. I think that that was something we were hungry for. We were physically separated from each other, and now maybe those of us relying on that closeness or the theological study of others were really struggling with like, well, what do we do with this now? So yeah, I think that you absolutely are so smart to have identified and seen a need for that. So I'm curious because obviously that was something that was born out of your own, not just, "Oh, cool, I see this happening, and I've processed through these things, so maybe I should create this whole beautiful platform for processing this messy middle ground," like you say. What kind of experiences were you walking through that led you to say, "This is bigger than me having a new framework of understanding?"
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in not quite a fundamentalist Christian background, but adjacent to that. And so I had a lot of those like mindsets and things like that that I brought with me to my faith, even years and years later. Even if I left behind pieces of it, there was still a bunch of that there.
Mm,
And then when I just sort of like, when we were going through what we were all collectively going through as a country, as a world, there was a sense of, watching the people who had helped shape my faith and understanding that the way they were reacting was not the way that I was reacting, and in a way that I didn't think was healthy or good or Christ-like. And so there was this sense of like processing that dissonance, which, at first you get real like you're just sort of confused and then you get angry. And so I went through, maybe you missed my angry phase, but I definitely went through that early on in that sense. And it was just sort of one of those things when I realized that I was able to put words because I'm an Enneagram 5, so I'd already processed a lot of this because it's happened to me a long time ago, and I had already sort of like been able to put some words to that. And so it's when I was able to name those things for other people that I realized that people needed someone to do that or someone to come alongside them in the journey and maybe help them like take that next space or help them articulate the things that are bouncing around in their brains that they're not able to just yet because they don't have that distance that I had. So even though there was sort of like an emotional freshness to it, it wasn't something that felt completely new. It was something I had sort of walked through already and now was like going back through in a different dimension um of my faith journey. And so that's really just kind of what kept me going was going, okay, I know that there's a way that I can communicate what people are thinking or feeling or needing to share, but aren't quite able to. So, how can I give them that vocabulary so that even if they can name it for themselves or if they need to have conversations with other people, they've got something to work with?
mm. I think the space of just validating what so many people were feeling and thinking and experiencing in that time frame was an incredible gift. That was something we were mostly just hearing negative toward, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, if you're and of course, all of those automatic thoughts that we have that if you were raised in the church or even spent any amount of time in memorizing scriptures, you've got all of these things that come to mind that warn you about all the backsliding that you're doing and all of the lukewarmness that you are now wading into. And I mean, for myself, I'm still fighting automatic thoughts that are terribly harmful in that same realm. And I think one of the ways that you have done validation for people so well is identifying what they're saying or thinking, like you said, but doing it with humor. I think that has been such a gentle way to invite people into it. How has that humor in your own life allowed you to kind of navigate those uncomfortable areas without just, cruising by, like we use sarcasm, just like, oh, yeah, that's awkward. And bye, we're out of here. I don't mean humor like that. I mean, really, just you've got this natural approach to these very complex, unanswerable questions with a softness that can laugh about it, that can say, yeah, this doesn't make a lot of sense, or there is dissonance here. What are we going to do about it? So, how has humor supported you that way?
Yeah, I mean, I think like for a lot of people, humor can be a coping mechanism.
Totally.
And and so for me, it was just one of those, I think I had the benefit again of some distance. And then of course we all had the benefit of a little bit of physical distance from a lot of people at least at the start of all this. And so there was sort of this feeling that I was kind of like in my own little world, but communicating with this specific group of people who felt the same. And I was like, they're going to get it, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that was sort of the gift of stuff like TikTok or Instagram Reels, like the things that sort of popped up, where you could take these really serious things and put sort of a silly twist on them so that it felt ridiculous, but it also felt true.
Mhm.
Um, and it just sort of like helps you, yeah, like walk through and think about it differently, or at least I don't know, for me takes a little bit of the sting out of the truth, right? It's like going to listen to a great comic and then they end up talking about really serious stuff, but they do so in like a heartfelt way. Not that I'm a great comic in any way, but like
Don't do that. Yes, you are.
yeah, I'm not a stand-up comedian. I will never be. But there is a sense in which, there's a way that you can walk through heavy things if there's a little bit of humor. And so we sort of were gifted, the right media at the right time in order to sort of communicate in that way. And so for me, it's been helpful. Um, but also I like it just sort of like gives a different way. Like I said, there was a period when I was really, really angry, and then I got sort of exhausted from being angry all the time and was like, there needs to be a different way that we can look at this and still have conversations, but without that bite, and have that space. And I think humor at least put a foot to keep the door open to make that happen.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that back up because I wanted to go back to when you said I missed your anger phase. I giggled because I think that is, taking this towards a grief direction more
Mm,
intentionally. That's such a misunderstanding of the experiences we have in grief, that we are angry for a period of time, we are bargaining for a period of time, we are depressed for a period of time, then we're finally accepting. And at some point in there, we denied what was even happening. Um, because the fact is that 2 or more things can be true. We can be
yeah.
depressio.com, angry as hell, and laughing at all of the sarcasm that is keeping us afloat on this, lukewarm water in which we now swim. And when you said stand-up comedian, there's a couple that come to mind that have been so brilliant and biting, but allowing those of us in that kind of space to soften toward who we've been, to invite who we are becoming to the surface and really to lean in, even as we continue to disentangle. What have you learned about yourself and about the growth process through all of this disentangling?
What have I learned about myself? I think, and this sort of like comes back to the grief conversation. I think what I realized about not just I had plenty to grieve over the last few years, besides a lot of, the faith deconstruction-y stuff. But I think on top of that, just realizing that a lot of those things, like you were saying, the anger and the denial and all of that, that even the way in which, my cynicism was showing up, or the way in which I was sort of like manifesting a lot of these emotions in the public and private square, I realized that I was not just grieving like the loss of a community, but grieving partly the loss of my identity, right? Because I had put so much, like I was Kate, the good Christian girl for most of my life. And so when the framework that you have for what that looks like changes, it changes, you know, who you think you are, and you have to sort of like rewind all of that and rework. And so there's a lot of things that I've, had to rework from what I think the point of the Christian life is, to what I think God wants from me and how I interact with people. Um, and I've had to start like really working on putting all the pieces of me back together instead of trying to silo all of these little bits because this part is more important than that part is more important than that part. And so I think I've learned a lot about how, I express different emotions, or how, um, I'm strong, or how I process. I think I've learned a lot of different things. Um, but I think that's probably the biggest thing, is that I've actually learned to take care of myself in a way that I didn't before.
I think that's significant because most of us, even in a good day, in a great season, in an easier season, don't necessarily know what it means to really take care of ourselves and to care for the wholeness of ourselves, right? We can
Mhm.
say, well, we get enough sleep, but we don't necessarily fuel our bodies well, or we're working out on a daily basis, but we're also really emotionally traumatized and relying on coping mechanisms for survival. So I think that that's beautiful. I'm curious if you're willing to talk about some of the things that you were grieving at that same time. When you mentioned it, I know that a lot of times we are hesitant to move into any level of grief work, um, because we know that it is entangled with a lot of other things that
Mhm.
we're hurting, maybe that we have never dealt with, maybe that we know very well we're going to deal with. For example, I, in dealing with my mom's death, have to wrestle with a lot of things that we left unspoken or unsaid or unresolved. And those are secondary losses, even though it's all connected to the death of my mom, right? So, how did those let me start over. How did those grief events influence and kind of disrupt the way you were processing your faith? And how did you navigate deciding, okay, there is a lot on my plate that all deserves my attention. Where do I begin? What was your
Um,
method?
oh, it was not a great method. So what I'll say is we we lost people. So over the last 3 years, um, I've been to 6 funerals, and um 3 of those were COVID, and 1 of those was gun violence. And like attempted mass shooting gun violence. And so it was sort of tied up again in like the spiritual community that I was a part of, and a lot of family and friends, who did not approach those topics in the same way that I did. And so there's or do. And so I think there was a sense of I think some of that is what accelerated some of those like shifts, because we sort of realized that at some point there's a deficiency, um, within this community, that we do not have the influence to help shift, and nor does the culture want to shift. And so the solution then is to remove ourselves for our own sake and for our own formation, et cetera. And so there was sort of a sense of like we then, grieved the loss of of a community and our friends, and not even that we don't still talk to some of those people, we absolutely do, but I think there's a grief in realizing that the people that you were around were not the people that you thought they were, um, and not the people who they say they are all the time, which fair enough, me either. But I think there were some very important things in which we just realized how big the gap was. Um, and so yeah, I think part of that was like separating to be in healthier places or circles so that we could find what we needed to move forward. I think there's a sense of I am very lucky to be in a great marriage, and we're on the same page with a lot of things, and there was a sense of like really getting to um unpack our values and figure out what that looks like and how we move forward with that. And we sort of like built our own community in a different way while we were sort of in between official ones for a couple of years. And so that was really helpful, which is very unusual for me. I don't rely on people to get through things. And
You're like,
so it was
"Hi,
like,
I'm a 5. I don't need anybody,
yeah,
but I'll take
I was
all of
like,
those books. Thank you so much."
exactly. It was like, so in January, our dog passed, and it was like, and we'd had him for like, 12 years.
Yeah.
And so it was one of those like, uh, and the first thing was like, "Hey, let's have our friends come." And I was like, that's a weird thing for me to say." Like, if you'd asked me 3, 4 years ago what that would have looked like, I'm like, "I'm just gonna go to bed and it'll be fine." But we had our friends and we told stories and we played games, and it was like just sort of a different experience. And so, yeah, I think there was still a lot of internal processing and a lot of figuring things out, and like you said, like sifting what's what and where it's coming from, and you can't always tell, and it's always gonna like show up in different ways. But there was sort of a, and I'll also admit to taking on way too many things. Like, I went to seminary as a coping mechanism. I
Most unusual coping mechanism I've ever heard of in my life.
I mean, technically, I'd started seminary already, but, like, I really dove in. School was my coping mechanism because I started in the pandemic, but it was before anyone died, for me personally, and then
Yeah.
yeah, and then I overloaded my plate, so I wrote a book in the middle of all of it. Do not recommend. That was rough. This time last year was really, really hard.
Yeah.
So I think I sort of, uh overcompensated by filling my plate too much with things.
Yeah.
And then, I'm now I had to pay the price for that. And I'm now like learning how to restructure my life in order to actually like take care of myself. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's been through a lot of different phases, but I would say like they're building and having a community around things that are important to us and around things that we like, and that is easy
Mhm.
in a way that, not like we don't ever, argue or whatever, but in the sense of like, we know we're committed to be friends, and when we show up, we know that we get along and we don't have to like, mitigate a lot of relationships within the thing. Like, it's just an easy, good community of people that we like. And so like that has probably been one of like the most healing things. And even understand, and even being in seminary in a very different environment from um the you know, the faith of my youth, and being at a church that, honors the gifts of women at every level, like to be able to walk in a room and not have to justify my presence. So there were a lot of like places that opened as a soft landing for me, that made it possible to sort of like ease into um yeah, different environments, and even just like being around those people and like being trusted that I knew things, or being trusted with um friendships or resources or whatever, was really a way. So I mean, I really credit a lot of other people in in walking through that in a way that I probably wouldn't have said, 5, 10 years ago.
There's so much beautiful stuff that you said in there. Before I jump on it, I want to say really quickly, I've been validating the death of pets and celebrating their lives so much lately. We're going to repeat it again. It is completely
Yeah.
valid to throw a huge party in celebration of the life of your pet. Like, those are little tiny balls of unconditional love and accompaniment that stay with us until they're suddenly not there. And it's such a brave thing to love a pet and bring them into your life because you know their lifespan is shorter. And I don't think we realize the impact they really have on us until their absence is
Yeah.
felt. And so I think that's a lovely way to have processed. I love that you did that. Um, but I also love how you described the way you sought attunement with others and safety with others, even knowing, okay, if we leave this community, it's going to cost us. However, it will cost us more. It will cost us safety. It will cost us attunement. It will cost us even system regulation and security to stay. So we have to
Yeah.
go. We have to create a new space. We have to carve out an area where we can really express ourselves and explore what these feelings are, what these thoughts are, without experiencing that simultaneous condemnation that we can sense is right there on the horizon. So I
Yeah.
applaud you for that because that is a bold move. It's not something that is easy to choose, especially when you're already under the weight of loss, to say, well, let's just take on one more thing. Even though we can like double down and put too many things on our plate, that's a different take on one more thing kind of a existence. So, um, and I also would love to just hear too, like how your marriage has fluctuated throughout the pandemic and all of these changes that you said you have a great connection and you guys really it allowed you to clarify some values, which is huge, huge. And I'm a big fan of value work. Um, what did it do for you as individuals? How do you guys see yourself as really navigating your marriage individually? Does that question make sense? Or should I ask it differently?
Um, yeah, maybe try it a little differently. I think
Okay.
I know what you're saying, but just to make
Okay.
sure.
So when you are having one person grieve or both grieving, but you're grieving differently
Mhm.
because it has affected you differently. So you lose someone to COVID, that someone has a different relationship to you than it does to your than they do to your spouse. But you're also navigating all of this collective loss as a couple in your community shifts, in the global community loss that we are experiencing. How did the way you guys were transforming as individuals and grieving individually really affect the way you communicated?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've always been fortunate in that somehow though we have both changed immensely over the 13 years we've been married,
Mm,
um, that somehow it has always been close to the same pace.
mm,
And so there's and so sometimes we've had to navigate through that in a conversation of being like, this is where I am now because this is a thing that has changed me or challenged me, and we're good about that. But I think yeah, individually we both sort of my husband's the kind of person who like has to do a lot of stuff. Like a lot of times grief will like make me stop doing anything, and he's the person who like always has to be doing something. And so he just like keeps finding a different project to do. So yeah,
So
we were able to give each other the space to cope in the different ways that we needed to, and communicate through that. And um yeah, I think there's just sort of I think we've learned each other's rhythms enough to know
mm,
like when we need space and when we don't.
mm,
And and I think all of that work came in really handy as we sort of navigated what this next phase of our lives would look like together, considering all the different changes that were going on. And it's not like something like leaving our faith community. We had sort of thrown around the idea in the past, because of a couple of things, but there was never anything big enough to
mm.
like felt like it was big enough to leave. I mean, because we spent over a decade there, a whole marriage, and then some has been there. And so um it was one of those things where, as we were navigating different things, it was like, I think this is the time. And I was like, cool, let's go. And I sort of like lean on, um, I think my husband has a really good sense of discernment, whether that's around people or like timing of stuff. And so I sort of, it sounds like I'm like deferring to his leadership, but I think really it's just, I know that that's something that he has that I don't. And so I trust when he says, I think it's time, then I'm like, cool. I've just sort of been waiting for what is the right time because, you know, um, it could have looked a bunch of different ways. And so, yeah, I think we've just sort of like, we had a foundation of a relationship and a knowledge of each other that allowed us to sort of like go with the ebbs and flows of what that looked like at various times, and to keep communicating and working through
Yeah,
those
it's
different things.
beautiful. I love that. It's funny when you said, I know it sounds like I'm deferring to his leadership because I'm like, no, that's an automatic programming thought. Like you're legitimately just trusting him and saying, I'm with you. And yet we've got
Yeah.
this weird spiritual fog that stays and really wants to dictate. everything we're
Yeah, it's one of
experiencing.
those things that, like, I know from the outside, people looking in are like, "Oh, but she still does," and so because I hear those things, um,
Oh,
and and I'm just like, I know that but it's like, this is just how it works in our relationship. On the other hand, he's the one that does all the cooking, and he's the one that does all of that, like, we do not have a typical marriage
you're like, "Don't
in
worry,
that
guys,
way.
we're just progressive
I'm
enough.
holding
It's
it down.
fine."
Yeah,
Oh
don't
my gosh,
worry.
that's really funny. No need to defend anything. You live your life. We are with you. I love that. Okay, so I'm thinking about a couple things in that there's a privilege in being partnered when you're going through this and when you're going
Sure.
through grief and changing communities. And um, I'm not going to ask you, what would you say to the people who are not partnered or who are single, because that's not your experience. But I'm just thinking and want to acknowledge that there are some of us that are going through this and they're not in a relationship where they can say, oh, I have this attuned, safe place I can fall apart at home too. And so, I mean, if you're listening and that's you, just reach out because I have a lot of you that I know are listening, and that would be really easy to connect, or even say, I see you and develop resources or something. But the other thing I wanted to just touch on was how so many big emotions come up. And I know you're a very logical, linear intellectual person. Um, how did you navigate those disruptive emotions of, wow, I just attended the sixth funeral in the last 3 years, or I know that I am still leading the charge in all of these arenas, but I am now carrying the weight of yet another death, yet another loss. Um, I know you didn't just pretend you have no emotions, but how did you support yourself through those big emotions coming through?
I mean, there were a lot of times that I pretended I didn't have the emotions just because it's easier. You're like, "I'll deal with that on Saturday when I have time to deal with that." You know what I mean? Like, you just sort of,
Yeah,
like,
sure.
attempt to put it in a space. Spoiler alert, that did not work out great. Um, I think I just sort of, I think they leak those emotions leak out whenever you can't help it, and so there were a lot of times when, um there'd be something random and I'd be like, "Oh, now I'm sad." And so I'd just like take a few minutes and cry and then try to like pull
That's,
myself together and
oh,
for the rest of the day at work or whatever it was. Or, I think what's harder for me is less of the individual losses, although that is great. I think for me it was the stacking of them.
mhm.
And so, like, as they continued to sort of, like, stack and stack and stack, I mean, once our dog died, I was like, "I'm done. I
Yeah,
don't know," like, because
yeah.
at that point, it just becomes sort of like I was just like, "Okay, so someone dies every 6 months, and this is just my life now, and I have to, like, continue
Mm,
to," in the sense of I think the good thing it did is it made me put more margin into my life or put rhythms of space into my life in a way that I didn't before, because when those things pop up, it completely derails me in a lot of ways. Um, like I just become completely unmotivated. I can't focus. I can't pay attention. I can't really manage a lot of the stuff that I do, and I do a lot of things. And so it had to sort of like make me restructure my life, not only to have more space regularly, but also to like have regular rhythms of like rest and taking off and making sure I was caring for myself so that when that happened, it wasn't like, total breakdown city because because I was so tired and everything else, and so that it's much more manageable when there's a lot more care of myself in the process. And so it sort of, at this point, people aren't dying every 6 months, so that's a plus. But the lessons of like walking through that are still sort of with me in the way that I've set up my life to have space, um, to rest, to heal, to grieve, to whatever is sort of necessary in the season.
yeah, that idea of crafting margins so-called ahead of time is integral. Someone called my book grief insurance once upon a time because they were
Mhm.
like, I'm not actively grieving, but I wanted to have it. So it's on my shelf and I'm ready. And I was like, ooh, okay, don't put the pressure on if you don't read it right away. But what you're saying, and even grief insurance comment are making me think of, I don't remember if I said this once upon a time or if I read it somewhere. Old keys won't unlock new doors. And
Mm,
it reminds me, like, when we experience something new, the rhythms and the way that we've moved through the world before aren't necessarily going to be the things that help us move through the world now. And going through these thresholds where something is completely different on the other side, we have to have adaptability and flexibility, but also the willingness to try something new, to create new margins, to say no more frequently, or even decide, actually, I'm going to pivot 180 degrees and turn around and try something completely different now because my life is completely different now and I am completely different now. And that willingness to grow, the willingness to say, this key served really well. Thank you so much, key. You opened a lot of doors. You are honored and released. Like, you're fine. Just because it's such a bold place to move forward, knowing this is uncharted and this is going to suck in a lot of ways. And what do? I can at least find some resources or lean into my margins and cry for at least 5 minutes and feel really settled. Did you watch Shrinking on Apple TV?
we actually just watched it. Yeah.
Sweet. Okay. I was clapping and laughing because I'm like, I say all of these things. And my husband was like, yes, I know you say these things. But it made me so happy because we're talking about this thing, this loss, this discomfort now on a larger stage all the time. And I love it. I loved how, okay, spoiler, it's not really that much of a spoiler. I loved how the one character told the other character, hey, go schedule your crying times, and
Yeah.
how she so casually did it. She didn't explain herself. She didn't justify it. She didn't make it uncomfortable or awkward. She just allowed it to happen. And then when she was, caught up in crying and someone sees her, she's just like, what? Yeah, what do you need? And just allows it to be such a natural and soft thing. That's a margin. That counts.
Yeah.
Oh, it was such a good show. I could watch, okay, but like the last episode, the
It
boot,
was all great. I
I
really
died.
enjoyed the whole thing. So,
It's
yeah.
so good. I need season
Okay.
2, 3, and 4 right now, please. Because I would watch them fast. Okay, so we probably should wrap this up, but I do have one more question because um, I know that a lot of grievers are super afraid to kind of engage their faith when it comes to grief because they recognize the dissonance, they recognize the gaps and where their grief experience is going to poke a lot of holes in their belief patterns. Not necessarily because they're believing things that are not provable or that are not certain necessarily, but rather it's going to validate questions that they have. It's going to expose some more unanswerable questions, or in your experience, really expose some of the mindsets and behaviors that they've aligned with that no longer serve and that maybe have even caused harm. And I know that that's really terrifying. So I'm just curious what kind of advice you would offer, what you would invite someone into for the person who is listening and realizes, yeah, I don't want to touch my faith practice. I can't even do any of it right now because it's going to start too many questions and I'm not ready for them yet.
Yeah. I mean, I think knowing that you're not ready for them is great self-awareness. So,
Mm.
like,
Yeah.
as much as I would like to be like, no, just charge into the discomfort, I think there is a sense in which, even though you cannot predict how hard or what direction all those questions will go, if you have the ability to sort of like give yourself the space to decide when you're ready to enter in, like there's just going to be a time when it sucks, and that's going to be before, during, and after the whole process. And so I think you the best, and you know what you can handle at any time. For the most part, I think you'll probably surprise yourself, but I think there is wisdom in knowing that you're not ready to poke at that wound yet, or you're not ready to look deeper and figure it out. Sometimes you just need to sort of like get to a baseline before you can even get to that point. And so I tell people all the time, I'm like, take your time. God's not in a hurry. Um, God has all of time and space. Like, there's no need for us to rush through something. And even that need to have it figured out is one of those things that you're going to have to examine because that's one of that. And I think the other part is, um, Jesus walked all through all of this too, in the sense of like he lost a friend and he grieved, and he grieved not being understood by his community, and he grieved conflict in his family because they didn't understand what was going on, or they thought different things than he did. And so there is a sense of, I know that I can still rely on the life and witness of Jesus, because there is immense comfort for that in me, like that God has walked through it in a human shoes is huge. Um, and I have just learned to trust that God is good, um, and that even if I need time, you know, I I believe God wants me to be whole. And so whatever pace that needs to go or look like, um, or wherever my questions lead, that God is big enough, that God trusts our honest effort, that, you know, we are not outside of the reach of that, and nor are we outside of any of the questions that people have been asking throughout all of history. And so there is a sense in which the community isn't just the people around you. The community is all the saints throughout time who have walked through the same things and have pondered the same things and have landed in very different places. And so it's okay to explore. It's okay to look around. But only if you believe that God is good and you can trust God's character. And so, maybe when you start asking your questions, maybe that's where you start, is just, who do I believe God to be, and what does that, and is God good, and does God love me? And I mean, just those simple questions. I know that they sound really big, but I think there's some part of us in our gut that has a response to that. And once I realized that I could trust God to care, like I could trust God's character, um, so that even if I get it wrong, but I did so earnestly
Mm.
and with love and compassion for people, um, and love and compassion for myself, that God would honor that. I believe it. And so go at your own pace, let it suck, and, know that God's there when you're ready, and just go with your curiosity as you need to.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And even if you recognize, like, okay, my pace has taken me away from understanding of God right now, and just exploring what me that looks like on the other side of it, that's okay too. I love that you pointed out, like, there's no new question. It feels so new and real and raw, but the reality is I was pondering this today on my walk. I could see part of the moon, and I just stood there staring at it and allowing myself to feel so small and think like, I have problems. I am a blip in the timeline of humanity. And I'm worried that my shoes don't look cool enough. Well, that's not what I worry about. What is the first thing that came to mind? And it just it allowed me to put myself back into perspective, to invite humility back to the moment and say like, okay, this is the reality, is things are very manageable, and I have resources and I have people. And so thank you, Kate, for making yourself one of those people. I'm going to put all of the links to your book, An Untidy Faith, your podcast, your website, kateboyd.co. All of that's going to be in the show notes. Is there anything coming up for you that you want to share about before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you can pick up my book anywhere on all of your favorite online retailers. They all have it. But also I'm launching a brand, I guess, of Bible studies that I'm calling Threaded. And it's really for people who maybe have not been able to get into scripture, but want to sort of like start, um, you know, dipping their toes back in there in a in a little bit of community, but in really short, like I'm doing like one lesson a week. You can ask all the questions you want, and I'll be there to give answers. Um, and it's not a long-term commitment. We do 6 weeks at a time, and that's it. And so we're going to be focusing on the women of Jesus's genealogy as the first one, so that we can. I really love like how the Bible connects to each other, so I imagine there'll be a lot of a lot of that coming up. But if you sort of just want like not something daily, just something like weekly that can sort of get you in there in a way that is deep and a little bit scholarly but approachable, um, and a place that you can ask questions about all the weird stuff that you see in there or are trying to figure out, um, with someone who will hold space for a lot of different views and a variety of interpretations or whatever. You just want different, fresh eyes on scripture. This is the place. And so, yeah, that should be launching, I mean, any day now. So you guys can go check that out.
Amazing. Kate, you're an absolute delight. I'm so grateful you made this space. So thank you for coming and sharing and for just being vulnerable and honest. You're making a huge impact. And so I'm grateful to know you.
Thank you.
Mhm. Thank you for listening to episode 105 of Restorative Grief. I think the powerful thing about Kate's story and the way she presents her work is her softness. She mentioned curiosity at the end, and really that's it. Even when the thing we are grieving is that one area of life we hoped would always remain certain and steady, we can approach ourselves and our beliefs with a soft curiosity instead of criticism. We don't have to be afraid of uncertainty because uncertainty has been with us the whole time anyway. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome and thank you for making time to be here. Hopefully, you heard a little bit of your own story or maybe something that was slightly familiar and felt a little bit of a hug from this episode. I think that's what this one is for. It's for a hug. If you want to learn more about the offerings here at Restorative Grief Coaching, you can visit mandykapart.com. Of course, you can reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram at mandykapart. And all of these show notes, of course, are available with Kate's links as well at kateboyd.co on Twitter. She's a hoot and she's so encouraging. You need to follow her. I'm happy to connect with you. Of course, I won't coach you through the DM, so please keep that in mind, but reach out. I'm happy to look into pursuing a coaching connection if that's what you like. Be sure to subscribe to the show so you don't miss any of our weekly episodes. Leave a 5-star review everywhere you can think of. And if you feel like it, even become a patron, because the patrons and premium subscribers are always the reason I can keep this up. It's more fun doing this with friends anyway, so come on, let's join the club and you'll get access to lots of bonus episodes and extra content too. And before we go, as always, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.